Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. In this session, we're going to continue on with our iZotope Ozone 8 series, but this time we're going to check out the Dynamics module. Now, this is probably one of the most used modules other than the EQ module, and it's one of the most powerful modules as well. It's highly used in mastering, or in my mastering sessions anyway, and can be used in mixing, but it's probably not that common to do it because it is so CPU intensive. But the Dynamics module is basically a compressor module, but it's a very advanced, very clean compressor. It's multi-band as well. Now you can run it in as many, not as many bands as you want, but you can run it in a single band. You can run it in 2, 3, or 4 bands. And it's also got other features like mid-side and left to right, etc. So it's extremely useful compressor, especially if you're looking for a multi-band compressor. And this is a good one. And I, as I said, use it in my mastering sessions a lot. So let's get into it and check it out. Okay, so here we are in Cubase, and we've got the iZotope Ozone plugin loaded. We've got the full plugin listed there, and you could see the Dynamics module in there. Now, as I stated in previous videos, I've got the advanced version, so I could load this Dynamics module as a separate plugin on its own, but I'm just loading it in the full plugin for consistency. As with every other module, we can remove it, obviously add it. We could move it around if we had other modules and we wanted to change the order of the chain. We can bypass, enable it, could solo it, and we can load some presets. Okay, you can see the interface here looks a little bit complicated, but when you break it down, it's not as complicated as you think. So we've got various sections here. So obviously we've got this top section where we've got our bands for each of the compressors. For a multi-band compressor, we could change our view over to a gain reduction sort of display, which you'll see that happening soon. And we can also put some detection filters on as well. But a lot of the time we're going to be working this band setup here. So you can see at the moment it's got 4 bands. We can remove as many as we like down to 1 band, turn it into a single band standard compressor if we want. Or we can add up to 4 in at a time. Now we've got this section over here they refer to as the global section, and you can see at the moment we are showing band 1. So here we can flick between the bands, and that is this section here. So this section here is for the band that's selected here. So in this case, band 1, we can click over to band 2, 3, or 4. We can also click this all button, and what we get is basically a view of all the bands at the same time. Now, it gives you access to most of the features, but you will notice that there's a couple that disappear, like the knee that disappears. I think that's maybe the only one that disappears. Some options on the menus, etc., disappear, but pretty much all of it's covered, or the majority of it's covered in these fields here. So I actually like working in this view. I'm not really keen on working the individual views, but sometimes you do need to come over here, especially if you want to start adjusting the knee setting. So the way it's set up at the moment, each of these bands is independent. We can make any change we want separately, or we can actually click this button here and link all the bands together so that any change I make happens to every band at the same time. Now again, I will generally probably start with it locked in this view and set an overall sort of setting, and then I might unlock and tweak individually as I go. So we've got this adaptive release setting here, and the way it works is that it determines the length of the release based on, they're saying, the peak factor of a signal. So what they're indicating is that if you get a very transient signal, so sort of like a drum kit, very transient, then the release time will be made shorter to get less pumping. And if it's more sustained notes, then the release time will be made longer for lower distortion. So even though this adaptive release is set, you also have your own release setting on these controls. And what they're stating is that the adaptive release works based on the setting that you put in here. So what they're saying, for instance, if I set 100 millisecond release, the adaptive release will then work within a range of 20 milliseconds to 200. So depending on what you set the release to, the adaptive release will still function, but it will work in a range around that release time. We have a gain control here that we can manually adjust our gain to make up or drop our gain down, or we can actually click on this auto gain. So as we compress, the volume reduces, the auto gain should kick in and should automatically set the makeup gain for you. But if you prefer to do it manually, you just turn that off and then you can use this control here. And these settings here work across the board. So they're not individual to each band. They are on every band across the set. All right, so if we go back to our individual band setting here, we've got our meter here. So we've got our level detection on the side, and in the middle is going to be our gain reduction being shown here. But you've got three settings as well. We've got peak, envelope, and RMS. So this is not just determining the actual meter itself, it's determining the detection circuit itself. So if we have it set to peak mode, then the detection circuit is going to look at peak levels of incoming signal. If we set it to RMS, then the detection circuit is looking at an average level of the incoming signal. And if we set it to envelope, it states that it behaves like RMS mode, but with some advantages. It is supposed to produce more even levels across all the frequencies and not produce aliasing or artifacts that RMS can cause. We have a parallel control, so if you like to do your compression in sort of parallel, we can, by default, it's fully wet. That means we're compressing the entire signal. We're hearing the entire signal. If we go to dry, that means we're hearing none of the compression. We're just hearing the dry signal. And anywhere in between, we're getting a bit of both. We're getting a bit of dry signal, uncompressed, and a bit of compressed. So very handy if you want to hit the compressor a bit harder and back off a little bit with the mix to get that parallel compression sound. So a lot of the rest of the settings here are pretty much the same as any sort of compressor or limiter. So we've got two functions. We've got a limiter and a compressor. So these are going to work very similar because basically a limiter is a compressor that's usually got a higher ratio. So, but in this case here, the values themselves can be pretty much identical. So it's almost like you've got two compressors or two limiters. Now, more than likely what you're going to do is that you would set the ratio on the compressor a bit lower. The limiter would be higher. And you're going to set your threshold because you've got a threshold for each as well. So you've got a threshold for the compressor and a threshold for the limiter. So like any compressor or limiter, you've got a ratio, you've got attack, release, and we've got a knee setting here. So you can get a visual representation here. You can actually even adjust the settings here. And you can see little bands that changes the knee, and that's the ratio. So you can adjust from here, but I don't generally adjust from there. I like to adjust from these settings, but like I said, I generally do it from here as well. So I'll even do it from this setting here. So we can do that. And as I said, we can lock all the bands, but we'll just go back to this setting here just for the visibility of it. So we have ratios, and we've got lots of settings there. You know, we've got 1 to 1, which does nothing. We can go up in tiny little increments all the way up to 30 to 1. But we can even go into a reverse pattern here. And when we go into a negative number like this, it actually works as an expander. So not only can we be a compressor, but we can also be an expander. Like any other compressor, the attack determines how fast the compressor starts compressing once the audio goes above the threshold. And that's the threshold. So this threshold setting here determines when the compressor will start. So as soon as the audio signal goes above this line, the compressor will activate and it will start based on how long the attack is. So the faster the attack, the quicker the compressor will start. Slower the attack, the slower the compressor will start. Then we've got our release, which is the opposite. So once the signal falls back below the line, the compressor will then stop compressing, sort of turn off. And the faster the release, the quicker that turning off function will happen. The slower it will take to turn off, and will just stay on. If you do it too slow, then it may never ever turn off, because the beat will always just push it over the line or something like that. Just depends on the source and what you're trying to compress. The knee sets how sharp this line here is. So if we go for a very high ratio, so in this case, if we raise the knee, so if we drop the knee, you'll see it's very sharp. If we raise the knee, it rounds it off a bit. It's very subtle in the diagram there, but generally what happens is it just rounds that off. So it seems like more of a subtle compressor sound, so it's not that obvious no compression sort of thing. It does a gradual start to the compressor, but what it also means is that it starts compressing earlier and finishes earlier as well, later. So you get more of an impact there. So with our multi-band function, we've got all of these functions in every single band. They're all identical. So think of it as 4 individual compressors, all working on a different set of frequencies. And you can determine that frequency by dragging this line. So if you set it to there, you're saying that this first compressor is going to work on any frequency below 200. And this second compressor is going to work between 200 and 2K. This third compressor is going to work between 2K and 10K. And this fourth compressor is going to work from 10K up. Now, obviously, you can see the line there. There's a bit of a gradual slope there, so a little bit of crossover happening between them. But it's going to make it sound a lot more natural. Now, each of the bands, you've got 2 controls here. You've got bypass, you've got solo. So while you're doing the compression, you can solo it, have a listen to the effect that it's causing. You can bypass it, listen to the original, bring it back in. Now, one trick that I've shown with the other plugins when it comes to multi-band is the idea of potentially leaving one bypassed. And I've explained before the difference between that and removing the band. If I bypass it, it leaves this frequency range locked away from any of these other bands, any of these other compressors, but doesn't actually do any compression. Now, if I was to actually remove the band, suddenly this band stretches out across the whole field and will compress all of it. So that's the advantage of having the extra band in there, even if you don't want to compress. And you can do that with anyone. So you could say, okay, well, I want to compress the low and the top, but I don't want to compress my mid where all my main elements of my vocals are. So you can bypass that section. And if that isn't enough, you can then do all of that functionality in mid-side mode. So not only can you do multi-band, but you can do mid-side. So now, technically, you've got 8 compressors. So you've got 4 compressors in the mid and 4 compressors in the side. And again, you can solo to listen. You can bypass one or the other. And you have all of that functionality across all of those bands and each of those mid and side. So you can see it's extremely powerful, and you can do some really great work with this. You can also do some lot of damage with this. All right, so I'm just going to put this back to a default state here. So we're in a default state. I'm going to show all. I'm just going to lock the band. Okay, so we've got a full song, and it sounds like this with the plugin bypassed. So now we'll bring the plugin in. So you can see it's already doing some compression here. And you'll see it responds differently to each band. So you can see not much is happening on the top. Heavy compression on these 2 sections and a bit there as well. Set the auto gain. So that's in its default state. We've got a ratio of 2:1 for the compressor. So this band here, this control here, I'm adjusting the threshold just for the compressor. So that's me pulling the threshold down for the compressor, not for the limiter. And we've just got default settings at the moment. So we can hit all the bands really hard. Change the ratio. So obviously I'm going over the top here just for example purposes. Slow the attack down. Now we can also look at this graph here, showing our overall compression. See, as we bring the ratio down, it starts moving very erratically because it's going quite fast with the movement. You can see that there. Slow it down. Starts to hang back a little bit. We change the release very fast. Again, we start moving up and down a lot faster. We slow it down. Now we just sort of hang, compressing most of the time. Now, as I said, you can also adjust this limiter threshold as well, so you can be compressing some signal but also limiting at the same time. So if we drop our compressor down, something more reasonable. But then we've got our limiter that can kick in. So you can hear our song sounds totally different. So in this view here, we can also control some settings around the detection circuit. So when we have it set to none, that means we're doing no filtering or anything on the detection circuit. So the detection circuit is seeing the entire audio signal and it's basing its decision on whether it compresses or not on that entire signal. Now we can turn on a high pass filter so that if we wanted it to ignore the kick when it makes its decision about compression, we could do that. You can change the slope. You can also solo. So when we click the solo button here, we're actually listening to the audio as if the detection circuit. So we're hearing what the detection circuit would hear. So you can hear we've taken the low end out. That's none. So we've also got this tilt control here. So we can adjust the tilt. So what that does is it adjusts, again, what the detection circuit is hearing, but it sort of sways it to hear more of the top end and less of the low end. And you can obviously make that even more exaggerated. So you've got this line that shoots up here. And with it in solo, that's what the detection circuit would be hearing in this state. So we've still got a boost even at 0. It's what it's normally hearing. So in this case here, it's over exaggerated. So it's obviously going to compress more in the top end because it's hearing a lot more top end. It's going to compress less on the low end because it's hearing less of that. Let's go back to our setting here. So for instance, so let's try out the solo thing here. So while in solo, we could adjust our settings here, or let's say we had our overall setting here. I'm going to unlock the band. And if you wanted to, we could actually go over to this view. And we could determine what we want to do on the low end. You might want to bypass it, as I said, leave it uncompressed, or start compressing. We can change the knee. We can set the limiter. Or we can even parallel. So it's nothing, halfway in between. So let's go to something more obvious. over compress really badly. Let's even limit it. Now you might blend some in. That's before and after. So we've brought it out further. We've got a lot more grit to it. Not necessarily something I would do, but as an example, you can hear what that's doing. Let's jump over to mid-side mode and have a look at what we can do with that. So let's solo the sides. So you might want to compress a bit more of the top. You might want to remove a band or something. Move things around. Not compress the low end. Or leave it in there. And the mids, you might want to do something in the middle. You don't do any top end. So, and as I stated, so if we go back to stereo mode here, we could remove all of these bands and work at single band mode. And now we just have a standard compressor and limiter. So you can see it's a very powerful tool, and here's a little setup that I have for mastering, and it's one that I like. I actually sort of got this technique from watching Ian Shepherd. If you've ever heard of him, he's a very good mastering engineer for sort of home stuff, so really good at that. So it was a really good technique I liked, and he liked to work in 3 bands and set the bands up like this. And the concept of this was that basically you just do a little bit of compression just to try and help balance out these 3 bands, the frequency ranges, get them together. But then, as I said, what I like to do is if I find that setting it like this is pulling too much of my mid out, I'll then unlink it and maybe adjust my settings on one of the controls. But the other thing I like to use it for as well is if you've got a problematic song that's got something like a crash or a shaker or something that's a little bit too out of control, I might come in and say add a band here, and I'll create a very specific section. I'll bypass all the other sections and I'll just create this little section here where the shaker or the crash or whatever it is, and I will try to compress it to get its level down a bit. So I might hit it quite hard. Or I might just bring its volume down. So you can hear how dull it gets by me reducing this section. You could use a limiter to control the peaks of that cymbal or shaker hit. So that's another common technique that I'll use this multi-band compressor for. So there you go. There's the dynamic module in iZotope Ozone 8. Let me know what you think of the module. Would you use it in your mastering sessions? Do you think it's powerful? What do you like about it? What do you don't like about it? Let me know in the comments. Love to hear your thoughts on this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you can get informed of all the new videos as they come out. Also, don't forget to check out the previous videos in the iZotope Ozone 8 series that I've done and any other videos that I have done in the past. Also, don't forget to feel free to come over to my website and check out my other content and tutorials. Hopefully it's been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.